The letter arrived in late August, brittle with heat and hope. Ada. Monroe stared at it on the kitchen table of the boarding house where she worked evenings and slept in a room the size of a hayloft. The handwriting was stern, slanted, and spare, like a man who had long since forgotten how to soften his words. Miss Ada Monroe, this ranch requires a capable woman, not a daydreamer. If you accept, come by the 6th. Don't be late. R. Thatcher. There were no kind words, no promises, just an offer. But Ada had learned not to expect softness from the world. She folded the letter slowly and whispered to herself, "It doesn't have to be forever, just a place to start." When the train reached Willow Bend, no one waited for her. The station was little more than a bench and a post with the town name hand-painted in fading red. Heat shimmered off the rails, dust clung to her hem, and the man who finally rode up didn't offer a hello. He looked her over once and said, "You're earlier than I expected." "I thought that might be better than being late," she replied. He nodded stiffly. "You got your own bags?" She did, but she carried more than that. Memories of slamming doors, of people who left without turning back, of trying to be enough in rooms that always made her feel too much. Still, she lifted the case and followed him to the wagon. His name was Royce Thatcher, middle-aged, weathered, a man carved more by wind and disappointment than years. He didn't speak as they traveled the dusty road toward his ranch. Didn't ask questions. Didn't make space. When they arrived, he unloaded her case and gestured toward the porch. "You'll be in the East Room. Supper's at 6. If you're still here by then, I'll assume you mean to stay." "That's not how most folks greet their bride," she said flatly. He turned to her, something cold behind his eyes. "You were sent here to help me run a home, not for hand-holding." Ada blinked. Not because she was shocked, but because she'd expected exactly this. What she hadn't expected was how little it would hurt. That night, she didn't unpack. She sat on the small bed in the East Room and looked out at the empty barn, the worn fencing, the silent shadows that clung to the porch. This was not a home, not yet, but it was land, and land could grow something, even from ashes. The next morning, Ada rose before dawn. Not because she was told to, but because it's what survivors do. They move before the world remembers to push them back down. She found flour in the pantry, hard as stone but usable, and a small crock of lard tucked behind a bag of beans. There was no milk, no eggs. Still, she made biscuits, dry but warm. When Roy stepped into the kitchen, he looked at the table, then at her. "Didn't ask for that." Ada didn't flinch. "Didn't need to. You're up early. You'll want something hot." He sat down without a word, ate in silence. When he was done, he pushed the plate away. "They're too dense. Use less lard next time." Ada stood, gathered the plate, and replied evenly, "You're not the only one learning here." Outside, the land stretched wide and aching. The house sat crooked on a rise, the porch listing slightly to the left. A barn leaned like it had grown tired of standing straight. A corral held only 2 horses, both too old to gallop, but not yet ready to die. Ada walked the fence line anyway. She took mental notes. The slats that needed replacing, the weeds choking the lower pasture, the chicken coop missing half its roof. This was a ranch built by grief and left to sag beneath it. That evening, Royce returned late. Dust on his boots, sweat down his back. He tossed a sack of feed into the corner and nodded toward her. "If you plan to stay, you'll need to pull weight." "I already started," she said without turning. She was stitching a tear in one of the curtains. "That's not ranch work." "It's homework. You wanted a home, didn't you?" He said nothing, and in his silence Ada saw it, what she hadn't noticed before. A loneliness so old it had turned bitter. That night she sat by the window with the curtain half sewn. The moon spilled across the floorboards like mercy, and she thought to herself, he doesn't need a wife. He needs to remember what a family feels like. But she wouldn't give him that easily. Not until he saw her for more than what he'd ordered on paper. Not until he stopped speaking to her like she was a servant. And not until he understood. She wasn't here to save him. She was here to rebuild herself. And if he wanted to be part of that, he'd have to learn how to build, too. The days passed in dry rhythm. Chores, silence, the occasional bark of a command from Royce. Ada didn't flinch when he raised his voice. She didn't flinch when he didn't raise it at all. She simply worked. She repaired the chicken coop with leftover scrap wood. She cleaned out the root cellar. She even patched the leaky roof with tarred cloth while Royce was off riding fence line. When he returned to find it fixed, he didn't thank her. "That was my job," he muttered, inspecting the patchwork. "And yet you didn't do it," she said, brushing dust from her hands. "So I did." He stared at her, half annoyed, half uncertain. She held his gaze. He looked away. In the evenings, Ada kept to herself. She read by lamplight, rereading the same 3 chapters of a tattered book until the words blurred. Royce usually sat on the porch, a bottle beside him, watching the stars as if they owed him something. One night she joined him. He didn't speak. She didn't either, but they sat together. Not as strangers, not yet as companions, but like people who had nothing left to prove that day. Later that week, Royce came in early, covered in trail dust. A saddlebag hung over his shoulder. He tossed it onto the table with a grunt. Picked up supplies. Ada opened the bag. Inside, flower matches and a bolt of soft cotton fabric. She looked up slowly. This for me? He shifted, eyes cast toward the floor. You said the pantry curtain was too thin. Thought maybe... He trailed off. Ada didn't smile, but she said gently, that was considerate. He shrugged. Doesn't mean anything. Maybe not to you, she said, picking up the fabric, but I noticed. That night, Royce didn't sit on the porch. He lingered by the doorway while Ada cooked, arms crossed, eyes studying her movements like a man unsure whether to speak or leave. Finally, he said, you weren't what I expected. Ada didn't look up from the skillet. You either. He nodded. Guess that makes us even. No, it means we're human. She set a plate in front of him, then one for herself. They ate in silence, the kind that didn't hurt. And when she cleared the plates, he said quietly, thank you. It was small, but it was the first time he'd said it, and Ada tucked it away like a fragile seed in dry soil. The first rain in weeks came suddenly, cold and hard, soaking the earth with the scent of revival. Ada stood barefoot on the porch, arms crossed, watching the downpour cut lines through the dust. Royce stepped out behind her, hat low, shoulders tense. You'll catch cold. Feels cleaner than what I came from, she replied without moving. A silence passed between them, not heavy, not sharp, just real. Later that night, thunder rolled softly over the hills. The ranch house creaked with the wind, but inside the lantern glowed steady and warm. Ada stood by the stove, a tin box in her hands. She opened it slowly. Inside were letters, yellowed with time. Old correspondence from other women at the boarding house, from her sister back east, and one final unopened envelope with the same slanted handwriting that had brought her here. Royce's. She hadn't read it before. Now she did. If you're looking for kindness, I ain't got much, but I've got land, and I've got space for someone who don't scare easy. She folded the letter, then set it in the fire. Royce entered as the paper curled into ash. You burning things now? Just words I don't need anymore. He leaned against the wall, watching the flames. That letter brought you here. And now I'm here. You don't regret it? Ada shook her head. No, but I regret letting people speak to me like I'm made of less. His jaw tensed. She added calmly, that includes you. Royce didn't argue. He didn't defend. Instead, he stepped closer. What if I don't know how to talk different? Ada looked at him, steady, unblinking. Then I suggest you listen more than you speak. That night, she didn't sit by the window to read. She sat by the fire. Royce joined her, slowly, like a man stepping into water unsure of its depth. No one said anything, but the silence was warmer now. The next day, Ada hung the new curtain in the pantry, stitched from the fabric he'd bought. It swayed gently in the breeze like it belonged, and in her chest something unfamiliar began to settle. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of something that might grow beside it. The early fall wind swept across the plains, tugging at the laundry Ada hung out to dry, catching the hem of her skirt as if teasing her forward. She stood a moment longer than needed, watching the land stretch endlessly before her. There was a stillness to it, wide, empty, yet somehow less lonely than before. Behind her, Royce worked at the corral, hammering in a new post with methodical rhythm. Each swing of the mallet was precise, purposeful. She had noticed that about him lately, how his rough edges didn't come from carelessness but from a life spent choosing silence over chaos. You don't have to fix everything yourself, she said quietly, folding her arms as she approached. He looked up, sweat glistening at his temple. Ain't fixin'. Just making sure it don't fall apart. Ada stepped closer. Same thing. Later, as dusk bled into the horizon, they sat on opposite sides of the porch, the silence not quite as comfortable as before. The space between them wasn't angry. It was questioning. Royce finally broke it. You ever think about leaving? Ada tilted her head. Not since the second week I was here. He looked over. That soon? That early, she clarified. Because I realized something. What's that? I didn't come here to run. I came here to grow. Royce nodded slowly. You don't let the world decide who you are. She smiled faintly. Neither should you. In the barn the next morning, Ada found a half-finished cradle tucked in the corner. Dust covered the edges and the wood had warped a little with time. She ran her hand over it gently. A name was carved into one of the panels. May. She didn't ask him about it that evening. Instead, she made stew. She set 2 bowls on the table, and she left a third spot empty, with a folded cloth napkin and silver spoon. Royce paused when he saw it. "What's that for?" "The part of you you've buried," she answered softly. "It deserves a place at the table, too." He didn't eat much that night, but he sat with her longer than usual. When she stood to clear the dishes, he reached out and touched her wrist. "I didn't know how to tell you," he murmured. "You just did," she replied. Outside, the wind rustled through the cottonwoods, and for the first time in years, the sound didn't feel like ghosts whispering through the trees. It felt like change. It felt like the beginning of something steady. The next morning, Ada woke to the smell of fresh bread. She blinked, disoriented. It wasn't a smell she associated with this house, not since she arrived. She crept down the stairs barefoot, cautious, unsure what she might find. Royce was in the kitchen, flour on his shirt and a proud but embarrassed look on his face. "Thought maybe you'd like a real breakfast," he mumbled. Ada blinked, genuinely touched. "You baked?" He shrugged, avoiding eye contact. "My ma used to. Figured I'd try." They sat together, not speaking at first. The bread was warm and dense, imperfect but made with effort. She could taste it in every bite. Effort, not apology. And that was more important. "Thank you," she said simply. "It's just bread." "No," she said, meeting his eyes. "It's not." Later that day, Royce took her to a part of the land she hadn't seen before. A patch of old orchard beyond the ridge, gnarled apple trees twisted by time. "I used to come here when I needed to think," he said. "Hadn't brought anyone here since—" He didn't finish. Ada didn't push. Instead, she walked slowly between the trees, running her hand along the bark. "They still bear fruit?" "Not like they used to, but some do. They're stubborn that way." She turned to him. "Like someone else I know." He gave a rare smile. "Maybe." They began working on the orchard together in the evenings, trimming, clearing brush, checking roots. The land responded slowly but steadily, and so did Royce. One afternoon, as Ada wrestled with a fallen branch, Royce stepped in behind her and helped. Their hands brushed. She turned to thank him, but stopped when she saw the expression on his face. Unguarded, soft, and scared. "You don't have to fix me, Ada. I'm not here to fix anything," she said. "I'm here because I see what's still good, even when you don't." That night, she found a small carving left on her pillow. A horse, crudely made but clearly done with care. No note, no explanation. She smiled anyway, and placed it beside her bedside candle like a sacred thing. Royce, sitting alone in the barn later, stared at the cradle again. His fingers traced the name May over and over. Then he picked up the carving knife, and for the first time in years he added something. Ada on the opposite panel. Autumn crept into the valley like a soft sigh, cool winds rustling the grasses, copper light filtering through the trees. The orchard, once weary and forgotten, now showed signs of quiet rebirth. Blossoms lingered, a few green apples clung stubbornly to the branches, and the soil underfoot no longer felt like memory's grave. But some ghosts refused to leave. One evening, as Ada gathered fallen branches into neat piles, she caught sight of Royce, standing beneath the largest tree, the setting sun behind him, casting him in silhouette. He was staring at something on the ground. She approached slowly. It was a small wooden marker, half-rotted, barely visible beneath the weeds. A child's marker. Royce didn't look at her. She was 6, May, bright, stubborn, thought she could talk to birds. Ada placed a hand on his arm, gentle but grounding. "You've never told me," she said softly. "A fever took her fast. We were too far from the doctor." "And your wife?" "She left 2 months after. Said the house felt like a tomb." He finally looked at Ada, pain raw in his eyes. She wasn't wrong. That night, Royce didn't eat. He didn't speak. He stood out on the porch, staring into the dark. Ada brought him a cup of tea, but he didn't take it. "You don't have to hold the sorrow like this," she said. "It's all I have left of her." Ada stepped closer. "No. What you choose to build in her memory, that's what remains." He turned to her, slow and uncertain. "You think I'm capable of that?" She nodded. "You're already doing it." The next day, Ada returned to the orchard alone. She cleared the area around May's marker, removing the weeds, placing wildflowers she'd gathered from the fields. She didn't say anything out loud, didn't pray, didn't cry, but in the stillness, she hoped the little girl knew someone else remembered her too. When Royce saw what she had done, he didn't speak for a long time. Then finally he said, "You made this place breathe again." Ada replied, "No, you did. I just cleared the dust." That night, Royce left something else by her candle. It wasn't a carving. It was a folded handkerchief embroidered with the letter A. Delicately done. Clearly old. Clearly kept. Ada held it in her hands for a long time. She didn't need to ask where it came from. Some things she understood without words. Days stretched into weeks, and Ada's place on the ranch shifted quietly but unmistakably. She was no longer a guest, or a hired hand, or a stranger wearing borrowed boots. She was there, woven into morning routines and supper conversations, into the heartbeat of the land. But some things remained unsaid. One evening, after tending to the horses, Ada found herself walking the length of the property, past the creek and up toward the ridge. Royce followed, silently at first, his steps a comfortable echo behind hers. They stood looking over the valley together. "You come here often?" she asked. "Used to, before everything broke." He nodded, then, "But you being here, it's like the pieces know how to come back together." Ada didn't know what to say. Her own pieces were still scattered, left in letters never sent, in bruises hidden under long sleeves, in nights when no one listened. She had not come here whole. She had not come here hoping. "I'm not fixed, Royce," she whispered. "I don't know if I ever will be." "Then let's be broken together," he replied. "The land's got cracks too, but things still grow." She turned to him. The last light of sunset caught the silver in his hair, the worn line of his jaw, the strength in his quiet. Later that night, Ada lit a candle on the kitchen table. She opened her mother's old journal, the one she hadn't dared read since the day she ran. Between its pages were notes about preserving peaches, dreams of visiting Oregon, and one faded recipe for molasses biscuits. She read until the candle burned low, and the silence around her didn't feel hollow anymore. Royce had left something again that morning. Not on the candle this time, but inside her work apron's pocket, a small tin of wildflower seeds, handwritten on the label, "For May, for you." Ada smiled, and for the first time in years, let herself cry without shame. The next day she began digging a new patch beside the orchard. When Royce asked what she was planting, she said only, "A little color, a little hope." Spring brought color, just as Ada hoped it would. The wildflower seeds Royce gave her blossomed in soft blues, purples, and sunny yellows, dancing beside the orchard like joy returned. The soil no longer felt like a stranger to her hands. It clung to her fingers like a welcome. But not all storms were weather. One afternoon, as Ada returned from town with a bag of flour tucked under one arm and a letter clutched in the other, she found Royce waiting at the edge of the porch, arms crossed, his hat drawn low. "You all right?" she asked. "That letter, someone dropped it off at the post office for you." Ada held it like it burned her. The handwriting, the name, it was from her father. She hadn't spoken to him in nearly 7 years. Not since he sent her away. Told her she wasn't worth keeping if she couldn't act like a proper wife for the man he'd chosen. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The words inside were shorter than she expected. No apology. Just a sentence. "Your mother is sick. She asks for you." Ada sat on the edge of the porch, silent. The weight of the past hit her like thunder. Royce didn't speak. Not at first. Then he sat beside her, knees drawn up. "You don't owe him anything," he said gently. "But if you need to go, I'll get you there." "I don't know what I need," she murmured. I thought I'd buried all this." "Some things get buried shallow. Wind kicks 'em up again." That night, Ada did not sleep. She watched the lantern flicker on the nightstand, listened to the barn creak with wind. In her heart, 2 voices warred, one of fear, the other of forgiveness. The next morning, she packed a small satchel. Royce saddled the wagon without asking questions. As she climbed up beside him, he reached over and handed her a scarf, her favorite one, the deep red one she thought she lost. "Didn't want you facing them looking like anyone but yourself." She blinked back tears. "I don't deserve you." He smiled softly. "Maybe, but I do." They rode in silence, dust trailing behind them, the wind heavy with memories and something else, something like healing. The journey to her childhood town took 2 days by wagon. Ada barely recognized the path. Time had worn down the sharpness of memories, but the ache in her chest returned with every mile. Royce didn't press her. He let the quiet be her refuge. Only when she reached out to hold his hand did he tighten his grip without a word. As they crested a small hill, Ada saw it, her father's ranch. Smaller than she remembered. The wooden fence was chipped. The barn leaned like it was tired of standing. It wasn't the place she had once fled. It was just a house now. She climbed down first, dusting off her skirt, steadying her breath. Her fingers shook as she raised her hand to knock on the door. It wasn't her father who opened it. It was her mother, thin, pale, eyes sunken with illness but still her mother. "Ada?" the woman whispered, disbelief clouding her voice. Ada nodded. Her mother stepped back, allowing her in with a trembling hand. The house was silent, save for the ticking of a clock that hadn't changed since Ada was a girl. Her father appeared moments later, still broad, still stern, but the fire in his eyes had dimmed. "I didn't expect you to come," he said. "I didn't expect you to write," she answered. They stood like two ghosts. Royce waited quietly outside, respecting the distance. Her mother took Ada's hands. "He's not the same. Neither am I. I needed to see you. I needed to tell you I never stopped thinking about you." Ada knelt beside her mother's chair. "Why didn't you ever write?" Tears welled up. "I wasn't strong enough. I thought I had to choose him over you. I was wrong." That evening, Royce joined them for supper. The meal was quiet. Her father mostly stared at his plate. But before they left the next morning, he stepped outside as Royce loaded the wagon. He cleared his throat. "She's stronger than she was. You had something to do with that." Royce nodded. "She made her own way. I just gave her room." The old man hesitated. "Take care of her." "I already do." Ada hugged her mother goodbye with tears that tasted of closure. She didn't hug her father, but she looked him in the eye. That was enough. As the wagon rolled away, Royce glanced sideways. "You okay?" She exhaled deeply, the weight easing from her chest. "I think I just finished a chapter I never meant to start." He smiled, hand brushing hers. "Well then, time to write a better one." The road back felt lighter, like they were leaving behind more than just a dusty old ranch. They were letting go of shadows that had clung to Ada's shoulders for years. She smiled more easily now, and Royce noticed every one of them like it was a sunrise he'd waited years to see. Their return to the homestead was quiet but comforting. Royce checked the fences, fed the animals, and repaired the roof that moaned with each windstorm. Ada, meanwhile, took to the land in her own way, planting a garden that mirrored her desire to nurture, to rebuild what had been hollowed out. One evening, as the horizon blazed in orange, Ada stood on the porch, hands soiled with earth, her eyes watching Royce wrestle a stubborn plank of wood on the fence line. "I can't tell if you're fighting it or dancing with it," she called out. He laughed, actually laughed. It startled even him. "I never danced before you showed up." She crossed the yard, wiping her hands on her skirt. "Then let me show you how." Royce blinked. "Here?" "Right now," she said, taking his rough hand into hers. "We don't need a ballroom, just a little moonlight and no audience." They moved clumsily at first, two people whose scars didn't quite forget. But slowly, as the breeze whispered through the fields and the stars blinked awake, they found a rhythm. Not perfect, but real. Later, by the fireplace, Royce poured 2 mugs of coffee. Ada curled on the couch, hair still wind-tousled, and asked the question she'd been quietly shaping for days. "Royce, if you hadn't met me, what do you think you'd be doing?" He didn't speak right away. The fire cracked. The air held still. "I think I'd still be watching the world pass by, thinking I didn't deserve anything more." Ada looked at him with the softness only earned through shared healing. "And now?" He sat beside her, not close, together. "Now I want to build something. Something that's not just mine. Something that's ours." The next morning she found a box on the porch. Inside, a pair of well-worn boots, a new gardening spade, and a folded note. "Not everything has to be fancy to mean forever. If you'll have it, this land, this life, it's yours too." She held the note to her chest, eyes full. The wind didn't howl that morning. It whispered. And for the first time, Ada didn't feel like she was passing through life. She was home. The letter stayed under her pillow for days, creases soft from the number of times she unfolded and read it in silence. Royce had never said the word love. Not once. But Ada had learned something important on this land. Words were just wind without the hands that proved them. Every nail he hammered, every bucket he carried for her garden, every chair he'd pulled out at dinner time, that was his language. But still, she wanted to hear it. That week, the town was preparing for its harvest fair, a rare burst of color and music in an otherwise steady rhythm of cattle, dust, and survival. Ada hadn't been to a fair since she was a child. Royce, she guessed, had probably never gone. So she asked, "You ever dance at one of these things?" He smirked. "I don't dance in public. You did on the porch. That didn't count. No audience." "Well," she said, brushing dirt from her cheek, "then maybe you need to see how it feels to dance when people are watching. It means you're not ashamed of who you're holding." That stuck with him. The fair was small, just a handful of wagons turned stalls, banners fluttering from split-rail fences, and children running barefoot under cotton candy skies. Ada wore a pale blue dress Royce had never seen before, She'd let her hair down. He couldn't stop looking. They walked side by side, not touching, but not apart either. Folks nodded to Royce with unfamiliar warmth. They stared a little longer at Ada. She didn't mind. She was used to being looked at. But this time it wasn't pity or dismissal in their eyes. It was wonder. At sundown, the fiddler tuned his bow and couples began to pair up in the dirt-floored clearing. The mayor's wife approached Ada. "Would your young man like to dance?" Ada smiled. "Why don't you ask him?" She turned to Royce, eyebrow raised. He swallowed hard and extended a hand. "Miss Ada," he said more formally than ever. "May I have this dance?" She slipped her fingers into his. "You may." They danced. Not flawlessly, not without laughter or clumsy missteps, but honestly. Royce held her close when the tempo slowed, forehead touching hers. "You look like the morning sun in winter." Ada blinked, then whispered, "Is that your way of saying you love me?" "No," he said, pressing his lips to her temple. "That's my way of saying I already do." That night, they rode home under a sky full of silver. In the wagon's back, beside crates of preserves and a second-hand quilt, was a bundle wrapped in brown paper. Inside it, a blue ribbon from the pie contest Ada hadn't even entered herself into. Royce had snuck one in without her knowing. "Why did you do that?" she asked, laughing. "Because I knew it would win, and I want the whole town to know your hands are worth gold." The house was quiet as they stepped inside, but the silence was different now. Not hollow, not waiting, just full of promise. The next morning came with a sky the color of lead. Clouds dragged low over the plains, thick and unmoving, as if they carried not only rain but something older, heavier. Royce watched the horizon with narrowed eyes. Something's coming. He wasn't talking about the weather. A telegram arrived around noon, slipped under their door by a neighbor boy too frightened to knock. Ada unfolded it with trembling hands. "Land dispute filed. Formal claim to be presented by Mr. Garrett M. Hollins. Court hearing in 3 days, be advised." Garrett Hollins, Royce's cousin. The same cousin who'd once tried to sell Royce's half of the ranch out from under him. Ada handed the paper to Royce wordlessly. He didn't speak either. He just crumpled it slowly in one hand, as if feeling the shape of betrayal all over again. That night, rain began to fall. Not a gentle shower, but a hard, punishing downpour that turned the soil to sludge and rattled the tin roof like 1,000 fists. Ada stood at the window, arms crossed over her chest. "Why now?" she asked. "Why him?" "Because he thinks I'm weak now," Royce said. "Because I stopped fighting." "You didn't stop," she whispered. "You changed." He looked at her then, really looked. "And if I lose this ranch? Then we build something new," she said. "Together." 2 days passed in a blur of documents, voices, and worry. Ada rode into town with Royce for the hearing. She wore a dark green shawl that clung to her like moss to stone. Royce, in a pressed shirt and his father's old belt buckle, walked with the slow, steady rhythm of a man who'd buried too much pride to waste more on posture. Inside the courthouse, Garrett stood tall and smug, all spit-shined boots and city cologne. His lawyer was louder than necessary, tossing around words like negligence, unfit, and sell-off rights. Ada flinched. Royce didn't. But when it was his turn to speak, Royce's voice didn't rise. It deepened. "I didn't buy this land," he said. "I was born into it. I worked it before I could write my name. And when I broke, it held me. Not because it's rich, not because it's valuable, because it's mine." The room was quiet. Then Ada stood up. "My name is Ada Lynn," she said. "I'm his wife in all the ways that count. And if the law don't see that, then the land sure does. And I'll swear on every seed I've planted here, this man is not unfit. He's rooted, and no lawyer's word will change what's grown." The judge, old and creased like parchment, stared for a long time before finally nodding. "Claim dismissed," he said. "This land stays in the hands that bled for it." Garrett's jaw tensed, but he said nothing. Royce, for once, smiled first. Outside, the storm had passed. The clouds cracked apart, letting gold spill through like hope itself. They didn't speak on the ride home. Their silence no longer held fear, only peace. And as they crested the hill before the ranch, Royce reached over and covered her hand with his. "Thanks for standing," he said. "I never sat down," Ada replied. The wind carried a scent of late summer, damp grass, warm soil, and the faint sweetness of peach preserves Ada had canned weeks ago. It was the kind of smell that made a house feel like a home, even when the roof still leaked in the northwest corner. Ada was kneeling in the garden, her dress dirtied at the hem, coaxing stubborn shoots from the ground. The sun kissed her hair, and Royce stood at the porch, quietly watching her with the sort of awe only a man who thought he'd never deserved peace could feel. But peace had a way of sneaking in when you weren't fighting it anymore. Later that week, a letter arrived. Not a court notice this time, but one written in delicate, loopy handwriting Ada didn't recognize. She read it aloud at the dinner table, her voice unsure at first. My name is Elsie. I was your sister Ruth's daughter. She passed 2 winters ago. I'm 16. I have no one. Mama always spoke of you. If this reaches the right Royce Callahan, I ask only to come see you. I ain't asking for charity, just a place to start. Ada looked up, eyes wide. Royce's fork was frozen midair. He stared at it, then slowly set it down. I didn't even know Ruth had a daughter, he whispered. 3 weeks later, a train hissed into the station carrying a girl with Ruth's eyes and Royce's stubborn chin. Her clothes were patched and her shoes too big, but she stood tall, arms folded, chin high. Uncle Royce? She asked. He nodded. I brought my own comb and I don't need no pity, she said. Ada smiled gently. You'll find we prefer pride over pity in this house. Elsie didn't speak much at first. She was used to silence, and perhaps too many doors slammed in her direction. But slowly, the ranch softened her edges. She took to the horses first, bold and unafraid, and Royce found her one morning whispering to a mare that had never let anyone touch her. Animals trust her, he said to Ada. She'll trust us, Ada replied, in time. That autumn, with Elsie helping tend the garden and Royce teaching her how to mend fence posts, the ranch began to feel fuller. At night, they played checkers on the porch. Royce lost most nights. Ada suspected on purpose. But when Elsie beat him fair and square, he raised both hands and laughed. The sound startled the crows in the barn rafters. It was the first time Ada had ever heard him truly laugh. One evening after supper, Royce sat beside Ada as the wind curled around them like a blanket. She calls me uncle now, he said, but I don't think I've earned it. You didn't choose to be her father, Ada replied, but you can choose to be her home. He looked at her, the sky darkening behind his silhouette. You're the first home I ever had, she smiled. Then let's build one she never has to leave. And so they did, not from brick or wealth, but from shared meals, open arms, and rooms filled with stories told by firelight. A family stitched not by blood but by choice, by love. Spring came with a slow thaw and the promise of new beginnings. Snow melted into muddy tracks behind the barn, and fresh shoots peeked through the once frozen earth. The ranch buzzed with quiet life, calves bawling in the early morning, chickens scratching near the porch, and laughter, real laughter, drifting from open windows. Elsie was growing into herself. She helped Ada with the chickens and challenged Royce to card games in the evening. She had a stubborn streak that mirrored Royce's, and a gentleness Ada recognized in her own heart. One morning, Ada caught her in the garden, humming to herself while planting beans in neat rows. You're not bad at this, Ada said, crouching beside her. Elsie smiled, her cheeks dotted with freckles. You taught me good. Ada touched her shoulder. You taught yourself how to stay. Royce had changed, too. The man who once only spoke in short, gruff phrases now lingered after meals, telling stories of his youth, of the horse that bit him, the tree he fell from, the scar on his hand he used to hide. And when he spoke, he looked not at the fire, but at Ada, his voice softer with every word. There was healing between them, slow like sap rising, but real. One Sunday afternoon, while repairing the barn roof, Royce looked down at Ada and Elsie laughing by the clothesline. I never thought I'd get to see this, he said to himself. He climbed down the ladder and found Ada folding a sheet. Have you ever thought about making this official? He asked, voice low. Ada blinked. The laundry? No, us. Ada raised an eyebrow. Are you proposing between dirty linens? I don't have much else to offer. Just this land, these hands, and a heart that took too long to find the right person. She dropped the sheet and stepped closer. Then let's call it a beginning, not a proposal. A week later, under the cottonwood tree where Royce used to sit alone in the evenings, they exchanged vows. Simple, honest, and without pomp. Elsie braided wildflowers into Ada's hair and held both their hands during the blessing. There was no ring, just a promise. That was more than enough. Afterward, Royce carved a small sign for the front gate. The Callahan place, it read. And beneath it, Ada added her own words. Where love grows and no one walks alone. They didn't need the town's approval. Or a preacher's sermon. What they built was stronger than paper or gold. It was built on scars that learned how to breathe, on silence that found a voice, on love that didn't demand perfection, only presence. That night, they sat on the porch once more. The stars overhead shimmered like scattered hopes finally gathered into constellations. Elsie leaned her head on Ada's shoulder. Royce reached for Ada's hand, and the wind, soft as ever, whispered, You're home. Life on the ranch had settled into a rhythm that felt almost too perfect, and Ada knew, deep in her bones, that peace like this was always tested. The first test came with a sky the color of bruises. One afternoon, while Royce was out riding fence and Ada was tending to the garden with Elsie, the wind picked up. Not a playful breeze, but a howl, angry and thick, like it had something to prove. "Get inside now!" Ada shouted, grabbing Elsie's hand. They barely made it into the house before the storm broke open like a flood. The roof creaked under the strain, windows rattled in their panes, and the barn doors slammed against its hinges like a battering ram. But Royce hadn't returned. Ada paced the kitchen floor, arms wrapped around herself as thunder cracked above them. Lightning danced across the dark horizon, and with every flash, she searched the fields from the window. Elsie stood quietly by the door, clutching a worn shawl. "You'll be okay," she whispered. Ada dropped to her knees and hugged her. "I hope you're right." Hours passed. The storm didn't let up. Then, just before midnight, the front door opened with a crash. Royce stood there, soaked, muddy, and limping, but alive. He leaned on the frame, his breath ragged. Ada rushed to him, helping him in, pressing her face to his chest as if to convince herself he was real. "I lost the trail when the lightning hit the ridge," he rasped. "Horse ran off. I walked the last mile." "Fool," Ada whispered through tears. "You scared me half to death." He kissed her temple. "Scared me too." The barn was damaged, fencing torn, but none of it mattered. What mattered was the way they worked together in the days that followed. Patching roofs, mending rails, and holding each other through the fatigue. Even Elsie, small but mighty, helped wherever she could. And through it all, not one cross word passed between them. Later, while resting under the same cottonwood tree where they'd exchanged vows, Royce looked at Ada. "Storms come," he said. "They always do." Ada nodded, her hand laced in his. "But if the roots are strong enough, the tree holds." Royce smiled. "And I reckon we've got strong roots now." As the sun dipped below the hills, painting the sky with fire and hope, Ada felt it again, that quiet certainty. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were growing, together. Just when Ada thought the past had loosened its grip, it returned, uninvited, and wearing familiar boots. One warm evening, as the family sat on the porch sipping lemonade and watching Elsie chase fireflies, a rider approached. Dust trailed behind his horse like smoke from a memory. Royce stood slowly. Ada did too, her breath catching. The man dismounted with practiced ease, his dark coat marked by travel and arrogance. He looked older, gaunter, but the grin hadn't changed. "Ada," he said. Her heart thudded. "Matthew." Royce's shoulders tensed like rope pulled too tight. Matthew was her legal husband. The man who'd ordered her as a mail-order bride. The man who mocked her shyness, belittled her in front of others, then disappeared before their first week was over. "I heard you stayed here," he said casually. "Looks like you made yourself at home." Ada stood tall. "I did more than that. I built something real." Matthew's eyes flicked to Royce. "With him?" Royce didn't speak. His hand rested near his belt, not on his revolver, but not far from it either. Inside, Elsie peeked out the window. She knew trouble when she saw it. Royce stepped forward, calm but firm. "You've got no place here, stranger." "Oh, I think I do," Matthew said, flashing a folded paper. "Still legally her husband. That counts for something in these parts." Ada took the paper, unfolded it with shaking fingers, and then laughed. It wasn't a joyful laugh. It was dry, bitter, exhausted. "You forged this," she said, holding it out. "You never filed a marriage license. I checked years ago. You wanted the money from the agency and a free cook, that's all." Royce stepped in. "You'll leave now." Matthew's smile faded. "You think you can chase me off?" "No," Ada said, stepping forward. "But the sheriff can. And if you try to lay one hand on me or this ranch, I'll see you in court. This land's under my name now." For the first time, Matthew looked uncertain. He left that night, not without a few threats and slurs, but he left. Royce watched until his shadow disappeared into the dusk. Back inside, Ada collapsed into Royce's arms. "I thought he'd never come back." "He did," Royce whispered, kissing her brow, but he found something stronger waiting for him. "What's that?" Royce smiled. "A woman who knows her worth." That night, under a blanket of stars, Ada sat on the porch with Royce and Elsie curled up beside her. They didn't speak of the visitor again. They didn't need to. Some ghosts come back to test you, but they only remind you of how far you've come and who you've become. A week after Matthew's visit, the skies darkened in a way that felt almost prophetic. Clouds rolled in over the hills like smoke from a war that hadn't ended. Royce stood by the barn, watching the wind twist the wheat fields. The cattle were restless. The horses nickered and stomped as if they too sensed something more than just a storm. Ada stepped outside with Elsie bundled in a blanket, her eyes wide. "Should we prepare for a bad one?" she asked. Royce nodded grimly. "This feels like more than rain." They moved quickly, securing shutters, roping the horses, locking the chicken coop. Royce kept glancing at the horizon. And then he saw it. A wagon. No cover. And in it, a woman and two small boys struggling to control the horses as the wind howled louder. He didn't think twice. He mounted Dusty and rode hard. The wagon was caught in a rut when he reached them. The woman was panicking, the boys clinging to her. "Ma'am!" Royce called out. "Come on, we've got shelter!" She looked up, soaked to the bone. Her lips quivered. "Please." He jumped down, unhitching the horses with swift hands and lifting the youngest boy into his arms. "Follow me, fast!" Back at the ranch, Ada had opened the barn doors wide. She and Elsie ran to meet them with dry blankets and warm tea. The woman collapsed inside, crying quietly. Royce knelt. "What happened?" "Fleeing my husband," she said through chattering teeth. "He's a drunk. Beat me. Said if I left, he'd find me." Ada exchanged a glance with Royce. "You're safe now," Ada whispered, wrapping the woman in a quilt. "He won't get to you here." That night, the storm raged like an angry god. Lightning cracked the sky, and wind howled against the walls. But inside the ranch house there was warmth, a fire in the hearth, soft voices, children falling asleep in safety. Ada looked at Royce as he stirred the fire. "We used to be the ones seeking refuge. Now we're the ones giving it." Royce nodded. "That's what family does, blood or not." The next morning the storm passed, but something had shifted. The woman, her name was Lorna, asked to stay on, offering to help in the kitchen and tend to the garden. Ada welcomed her like a sister, but deep down Royce couldn't shake a feeling. A shadow had passed them once, Matthew, and now another woman had run from violence. Something in the wind told him they hadn't seen the last of trouble. But for now, they had each other, and when trouble came again, they'd be ready, together. It had been 3 weeks since Lorna and her boys came to the ranch. The land had begun to bloom again, flowers edging the fence posts, fresh green on the apple trees. Ada, Lorna, and Elsie often laughed together in the kitchen, the sound like wind chimes in the breeze. Royce found himself smiling more, working harder, not from burden, but from purpose. But storms don't always come from the sky. They come on horseback, cloaked in dust and bitterness. It was early afternoon when Royce spotted them. 2 riders cresting the ridge to the south, moving slow, deliberate. Royce narrowed his eyes and stepped onto the porch, his rifle leaning against the post. Ada followed his gaze and stiffened. "You think it's him?" Royce didn't answer. He just nodded once, slow. The men stopped at the gate. One was lean and mean-eyed, the other broader, sloppier, reeking of cheap tobacco and arrogance. "You Royce Tanner?" the first one asked. Royce stepped forward. "Depends who's asking." The lean man spat. "I'm Earl. This here's Clyde. We're here for my wife." Ada stepped out behind Royce. "She's not your wife anymore." "That so?" Clyde grinned with yellow teeth. "Law says otherwise." Royce didn't move. "Law don't mean much if you break it every night." Earl's hand drifted to his belt. "Don't make this harder, cowboy." Royce's voice turned cold. "This land is mine. You ride back the way you came, or I'll bury you before sundown." Inside the house, Lorna was trembling, holding her sons tightly. Ada stayed by her side, firm and calm, whispering, "He won't let them near you, I promise." The standoff stretched like wire pulled taut. Then Earl laughed. "You think we care about your land or your girl? This ain't over." And just like that, they turned and rode off. Royce stood there, unmoving, until they were dots against the hills. That night, the family sat together at the table. No one ate much. "We should go to the sheriff," Lorna whispered. Royce shook his head. "Already sent word, but if they come again—" Ada reached for Lorna's hand. "They won't break this family." Lorna's eyes filled. "I never thought I'd have one again." "You do now," Royce said simply. Later, after the lamps were blown out, Royce stood watch on the porch, the rifle in his lap, eyes on the horizon. Some men guarded money or land. He was guarding something rarer, peace built with love and held together with second chances. And if trouble returned, it would have to go through him. The days that followed were quiet, but tense. Royce, always vigilant, rode the perimeter each dawn and dusk, his rifle resting in the saddle scabbard. He repaired the gate, reinforced the barn door, and started sleeping with one ear open. But inside the home, something stronger than fear took root. Lorna had begun to laugh again, not the nervous giggle of someone waiting for the next blow, but a true soft laugh, one that slipped out when Elsie told stories about the chickens, or when Ada teased Royce about his cooking. The boys, Teddy, the eldest, and Jesse, the shy one, followed Royce everywhere. They watched how he tied knots, how he held a hammer, how he spoke firmly but kindly to the horses. They asked questions, and he answered like a man who finally understood the value of being listened to. And then, on a cool morning as pink crept across the prairie sky, Earl and Clyde returned. Royce was already in the corral when he heard the horses. He walked slowly toward the fence, not with fear, but with finality. Ada stood in the doorway, rifle cradled in her arms, and Lorna behind her holding the boys close. Earl dismounted first, swaggering. "We're here to finish what we started." Royce nodded. "I figured. I got law on my side this time," Earl said, pulling a folded paper from his jacket. "She's still mine." Royce didn't reach for his gun. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope. "You're late," he said, tossing it into the dust. "That's from the county judge. Lorna signed it. You're no longer her anything." Clyde frowned. "You forged this or something?" "No," came a voice from behind them. Sheriff Braddock stepped off his horse, 2 deputies behind him. "I did," the sheriff said, adjusting his belt. "And if either of you want to argue it, I got a cell in town with your name on it." Earl's face turned red. "This ain't over," Braddock sighed. "It is now." Royce didn't watch them ride off. He turned toward the porch. Lorna stood there barefoot in the early sun, tears in her eyes. Not from fear, but release. She walked toward him, stopping at the base of the steps. "You didn't have to do all this." "Yes, I did," he replied. "Because you weren't just running from them. You were running toward something better." He took her hands. "If you'll have me, I'd like to be part of it." The boys stood behind her, smiling, their faces full of hope. Lorna nodded slowly, her voice trembling. "We'd like that." Months passed. The ranch blossomed into a home. Ada stayed, helping run the land like a matriarch. Elsie taught the boys to read better. Royce built a new room for the boys and replanted the garden. The air was filled with the smell of baked bread, fresh rain, and the soft sound of lullabies at night. Lorna never stopped limping, but no one noticed anymore. Because in a house filled with second chances, love wasn't measured by steps, but by the courage to keep walking forward. Western romance at its core is not just about cowboys and dust. It's about healing, about choosing love over fear, and about finding family in the most unexpected places. And for Royce, Lorna, and the boys, their story wasn't just a romance. It was the beginning of a new frontier,